Thank you. Thank you, Joe and Neville. I hope everybody can hear me. Coming through loud and clear, I hope. So it's great to be with you all tonight. It's a pleasure talking to you guys. I see a few familiar faces and names, Jean and Marsha, but there's lots of people I haven't had the chance to meet. So nice to at least meet you over Zoom. Hopefully, in some time in the near future, we'll all be going back to in-person meetings. And it's also a real pleasure to be talking to the Baltimore Bird Club about gulls. I didn't check this. I'm going out on a limb here, and maybe someone correct me, but I'm going to guess that Baltimore probably has the highest count of gull species for a county in Maryland. I'm going to guess. I think it's probably ahead of Hartford, which has Conowingo, and Cecil, which also does. So gulls are extra special in Baltimore. Hope you guys know that. You've had a very special gull there recently, which was not easy to track down, as they sometimes can be. So I'm going to start sharing my screen just to give you a quick overview. I'm just going to talk about, first of all, the gulls we get more often here, and I will cover rare gulls as well. The presentation kind of breaks up into chunks, so we can take questions at that. And also I have a little quiz at the end, if we have time for that. Although I'm afraid I don't have prizes to give out, but it'll be going through some of the stuff I've been talking about. So I'm going to start trying to share, and I hope this works. So do you all see a slide which says how to cure your, oh, hang on, I haven't shared it yet. Can you guys see that? Great, coming through. Okay, so as you can see, the title of the presentation is How to Cure Your Fear of Gulls. It's your fear of gull identification. If your fear is actually a big flock like that coming at you at the parking lot in Ocean City because you opened a bag of chips, well, I'm not going to be able to do anything about that. This is really just about gull ID. And I guess the place to start is, and I'm just having a bit of difficulty working through the presentation right now. Sorry, there we are. Okay, I think it's moved. There's sort of good news and bad news about gulls in Maryland. I'll start with the good news. The good news is actually there aren't all that many. And there aren't all that many of those large gulls which have immature plumages, which are all pretty similar. So you're actually, when you're trying to learn them, you don't have very many species to choose from, and it's relatively easy to learn them. Contrast that to being on the West Coast when you've got many more gull species, all sorts of hybrid, probably up to 3 hybrid combinations to worry about. Or even further north when you've got, probably more gulls up on the Great Lakes. So actually, it's not that challenging in terms of species number. Of course, the bad news is that gulls are very variable. The mature gulls all look different. No two tend to look the same. And so I'm not sure actually this is bad news or not, but you actually have to, it's one of those ones where you have to go and look at the birds. You can't, some bird species, you can read up on field marks from a book and you go out and apply it in the field. That doesn't really work so well for gulls. You actually have to go and look at them. And spend the time. So I'm going to go through these 3 groups first, the common large gulls, and I've included ringbill gull in that because in some plumages it's kind of similar to herring gull, though it's quite a lot smaller. Both the commoner dark-backed gulls, and then move on to the hooded gulls, which are smaller. Those are gulls which, at least in breeding plumage, have got dark heads. The white-winged gulls, and then just briefly touch on some of the rare gulls because that's always of interest, although to be honest, in a presentation of this length, I probably won't be able to cover everything about those. So just to note that. And as I said, if we've got time, we'll go for a quiz. So let's get started. So I'm going to start with the commoner gulls, and I'm going to start with the 2 which have got very similar upper part shades in adult plumage. That's a ringbill gull on the top left. This reminds me just to do one thing here. And here is the herring gull, or American herring gull as it's sometimes called. I won't go into that, but the Upper parts are very similar. There's quite a difference in size, and actually not too different, a bit different from how I've depicted it here, but they are noticeably different in size. And in adult plumage, and these are in winter, and you can see most gulls have a bit of head streaking in winter when they're adults. Variable amounts, herring gulls have a lot, ringbill gulls don't have very much. But you can see a couple of obvious differences. The leg color is different. The ringbill gulls as adults have yellowish or bright yellow legs, depending on the time of year, and a yellow bill with a solid black ring around it. Not all gulls are well named. This is well named. And if you start looking at the gulls right now and through into April, you'll start to see that quite a few of them have very bright legs and bills. This is the time of year when that stuff brightens up. Herring gull, in contrast, has these very dull pink legs. Usually they can brighten during breeding season. And in winter, it often has a dark mark on the bill. I'm just pointing to that. But it's never like this, really contrasting. And when you see groups of these together, they often hang out together. The herring gulls will be noticeably larger than the ringbill gulls. So quite a difference in size, but very similar in terms of upper part colors. When they're flying around, you might think, well, they're kind of hard to identify. I can see a gull flying around with pale gray upper parts, and maybe I'm not close enough to see the bill. This is a good, close enough photo. You can see that's a ringbill gull. That bird doesn't have a ring on its bill. But actually, if you see these at reasonable range, there is one difference between ringbill gulls and most herring gulls that we have here, which is the ringbill gull has much more black on the underwing. So compared to the herring gull, which usually has the black kind of hollowed out, it's just a much narrower extent nearer the wingtip. And that's visible at quite a long distance, actually. If you see a gull, I'll see gulls flying really quite a long way off. And I'm fairly confident if I see the underside of the wing well, that I can tell it's a ringbill gull. If I see a lot of black, I think, well, it's kind of unlikely that's a herring gull. So there are differences. One thing to bear in mind is there's always a bit of variability. We'll keep on coming back to that. That's one of the reasons why I said at the start, gulls are a group of birds you've got to put the time into looking at to appreciate that. And there's variability in the amount of black these birds have on the wingtips as well. So let's look at the ringbill gull when it's a bit younger. We saw the adult, super distinctive, yellow bill, yellow legs with a black band around the bill. In their first year, we don't see many juvenile ringbill gulls where we are. They tend to have started molted into this first winter plumage. As we're circling the upper parts here, which are gray feathers. So what this bird does, it replaces some of its feathers during its first winter. The upper part feathers, some of the head and body feathers. So they'll usually have a fair amount of gray, but not usually clear gray, usually with a bit of brown markings on it. And they do have speckling on the head, some very little, some more. And they have a very pale area there on the wings. This is known as the greater coverts. And this is a ringbill gull flying, and you can kind of see the same pattern there, sort of grayish in that pale area. So when they fly around, it's a very contrasting looking bird. You've got these dark area there, pale inner primaries, this pale area there with a dark bar. The tail is whitish with dark bars on it, and the underside looks pretty pale. So quite a contrasty looking bird. As they get older in their second winter, they look a lot like adults. In fact, here's an adult ringbill gull. We can see that yellow bill with a clear black tip. This looks a lot like an adult, but it's a second winter bird, second basic plumage, we can call it as well. Want to do it that way. Two things stand out immediately if you compare it to an adult. The bill is duller and the wingtips are black, all black. So many gulls always have black, the gulls with black wingtips, I should say, will have white spots on them, these white tips at the end, and they have other white markings on them. Those do wear off eventually, but not at this time of year. But gulls which are immature may look a lot like adults, but won't have that, or won't have very much, like this one. It doesn't really have any black at all that we can see. So we've got all three age groups there. This is ringbills mature in 3 years. It's what's known as a 3-year gull. So they all, one common thing is that they have these pale grayish upper parts, even the first year. And they're kind of whitish. They're not very heavily marked usually. It's kind of rare that you see one much more heavily marked than that. So pale gray upper parts, kind of whitish. The bill is not very heavy, and in the young birds, it's mostly pinkish with a black tip, and then it moves into having this ring on it. So fairly consistent things across the age class there. So let's start taking a look at the herring gull, and this is the first time we dip into these immature plumages that people who don't like looking at gulls dislike so much, because these birds, the herring gull, the lesser black-backed gull, the great black-backed gull, are what's known as, they're called 4-year gulls, because they take at least 4 years to go into their adult plumage. So they spend several years in one of these brownish with various amounts of gray or blackish on the upper parts. Now, earlier I said that, you know, in some ways we're lucky in Maryland and on the East Coast in terms of the gulls we have. And this particular applies to the first year herring gulls. So I've shown 1 flying here and 3 sitting here. And the 3 that are sitting, they do look different. You know, they don't look the same as each other. But there are certain features which are common and which you see on pretty much all first year herring gulls, and to some extent on ones in their second year, which is that this very brownish color overall. Particularly they have the smooth brown underparts. I'm just outlining that. See that there, you see that here, and you see that here as well. They're the only gull you would expect to see here in Maryland that is like that. So the other large gulls are much whiter below. We're going to see that. The ringbill gull is much whiter below. So if you're looking through a big flock of gulls and you see a bunch of very brown birds sitting there, and they're really very plain brown like this, you can be pretty confident that they're herring gulls, most likely first year herring gulls. When they start flying around, you can see a few features. There is this, what they call the pale inner window. That's the term that gullers use, but it's really the inner primaries is paler than the outer primaries. But it's a fairly darkish looking bird. There's not a lot of contrast. So these things, the upper tail coverts, as they're known, you know, and the rump are fairly, you know, they're a bit paler overall than the tail, which I'm outlining, but not very much. So it's this uniform brownish color that you're looking for on these gulls. And this is a you know, very fresh looking one with still the juvenile plumage, and this isn't. It started to molt some in, and the new feathers are grayish brown, but still that overall pattern is there.
Okay, I got you.
I'll just carry on. We'll perhaps it's best to take any questions at the end of this section. As they get older, they start to look a bit more like the adults, but sometimes they can be quite brown even in their second year. I think this is a second year bird. Many look like this. They've kind of got a bit of brown, of gray here, but they're really very brownish on the wings and the head and body. As they get a bit older, they start looking more adult-like, such as these 2 birds here. It can be actually a little difficult to know exactly how old these birds are. They could be 3 years old, 2 years old sometimes. We don't, you actually have to have a very good view of it to know. Herring gulls are kind of either brownish, like this overall, or when they're not, they're starting to get in fairly pale gray, and they're still quite brown until they get a bit older. So, you know, gulls do get a bit confusing as they get older as well, but there are certain things you can try to use as rules to try and sort this out. I'm going to try and combine a little bit of what we've been talking about here. So we talked a bit about the ringbill gulls in their first year. And I've got a picture of 3 pictures here. One is a ringbill gull in its first year, and 2 are herring gulls, which are older, probably in their second year. These gulls look quite similar because they all have pale gray upper parts, and then they all have this pink bill with a black tip. So that's a potential pitfall. Now they are a different size. So if you saw these together, this one, and I'll explain why, but this is the first year ringbill gull, would be a little bit smaller, noticeably smaller than 2 herring gulls. But of course, we don't always have the birds standing next to each other. They don't always conveniently do that. Sometimes it's just one species standing next to each other, so you can't use size, or sometimes a bird's by itself. So in this case, the key thing to look at here, because the upper parts aren't helping us a great deal, and neither is the bill, is to look at the wing. So remember I was saying that for the ring-bill gull in its first year, this area here, I'm going to circle it on the wing, which is the biggest area of the folded wing, and you see it in flight. It's called the greater coverts. That's very pale. It's a very pale area on the wing. It's paler than this area, for example. These two, which are herring gulls, you don't see that. This area is often the darkest area on the wing. And so that's a ready thing you can look at if these aren't terribly close. So that's a reminder that gulls of different ages can look a bit like different species, which are different ages as well. But you can try and apply the same rules each time. And so here it's really focusing on these pale greater coverts. And incidentally, I'll quickly cover this, but since, hopefully we'll get onto rare gulls, that's an important way of telling ring-bill gulls apart from common gulls or mew gulls when in their first year as well. This area of feathers, the greater coverts in that age. Okay, so we finished with the paler backed, large, quote unquote, common gulls. So let's now talk about the dark back ones. And I've got them both on the same screen. This is a great blackback gull here chasing a lesser blackback gull, which obviously had something. And you can see a couple of things here. One, this bird is much darker. So the great blackback gull is a much darker bird in terms of upper parts. When you see the birds in a comparable setting. And also it's larger and its bill is larger. We'll come on to that as well. And maybe this isn't the easiest photo to see a size difference in, but you're comparing the wings. This bird, look at the wingspan of this, it's folded compared to this bird. So that's quite a big difference. Now, I was mentioning the upper part colors. And it's important to bear in mind, and I should have mentioned it right from the start, is that if you're looking at gulls in conditions that are bright and sunny, you have to be pretty careful about the angle of the gulls relative to the sun, the source of the light, where the sun is, and how they're positioned next to each other. Because I've often been looking through a flock of gulls and I see, herring gulls, and I look at one, I think, boy, that one looks darker than the others. That's really pretty interesting. And then it just turns around to be in the same position as the others. And all of a sudden, it's not darker anymore. It's exactly the same shade. So that's a pretty well-known optical effect, but you've really got to watch out for it with gulls. They're really subject to that. Often, they're sitting around on beaches when it's bright light, etc. So just bear that in mind. And when we're comparing these guys directly, it's a big difference in upper part color. Some lesser blackback gulls can be really dark as well. We don't tend to get those in the US. But very often, if you're, it could just simply be the angle of the sun on the bird is confusing things. So let's deal with the lesser blackback gull first, a species that just keeps on getting more and more common in the United States. I think it didn't really start being seen much until the 70s, is my understanding. These days in winter and summer, they particularly like the beaches. If you go along Assateague Island, if you have the chance to drive along the off-road vehicle section, you can see an awful lot of lesser blackback gulls along that. They particularly like that. It's a species as well that not only is expanding in North America, people know that it's expanding in Greenland. I'm not entirely sure whether we know much about where else it is breeding, but it's also expanding in Europe compared to the herring gull in Europe. It's a very successful bird. So some characteristics, and this is an adult in winter. Like a lot of these gulls, it's got head streaking around it. And in lesser blackback gulls, the head streaking is often concentrated on the neck and round the eye. It can be variable. It's got these upper parts, which are sort of slaty gray. They're obviously much darker than the herring gull, quite a bit less dark than the greater blackback gull. often has a bright bill, even in winter, with some black on it, and has yellow legs. The brightness of the yellow, depending upon the season, they'll be starting to get really bright now. And actually, when these birds first turn up as adults after breeding in October, November, the legs can be really dull and almost the point they don't look yellow anymore. And so people start thinking, well, maybe it's something rarer. So with gulls, it's always worthwhile trying to rule stuff out. So like the herring gull, these guys also have confusing immature plumages. I actually think they're quite attractive in this plumage. I mean, first of all, they're nice looking gulls. You can see this one is a real classic Leicester blackback gull. They're smaller than herring gulls, certainly on average, and sometimes it's really noticeable. And they're long winged as well. And again, that can be really noticeable. Not on all of them, but it can be on some. And in contrast to the herring gull, which was this overall plain brown, smooth brown, this is a bit different. I always like to think of these as a paler head and body with lots of dark streaking on them. And the wings and the back are just more contrasty in general. So the wings are really dark with really bold white markings on them. The head and body are pale underneath. They're not the smooth brown. There's streaking on it of varying degrees of heaviness. When the bird flies, it's a very contrasting looking bird. It has this very pale area at the base of the tail, and this really solid, usually solid or fairly solid, very dark area along the wings. And then the head and underparts are very whitish, particularly when they're flying. So when they get up and start flying around, they really look different to the herring gulls. Like the herring gulls, as they get older, they start to add the adult color in their upper parts. This is a second-year bird, very often mixed with brown, with brownish on the wings. Bill can be kind of variable, can be black, can be much paler. This is a second-year bird flying around. You know, again, it's a much sort of more contrasting looking bird. And you have a lot of the slaty gray upper parts coming in the wings and in the back. And this bird here at the bottom is probably a third winter bird. Actually, the legs look, I chose this because the legs look kind of pinkish, and that's not unusual in that age group. They don't get the yellow legs. They can get the yellow legs a bit earlier, but often they don't get it till they're a near adult. So a bird like this, you know, you look at it and think, hey, there's a bird with dark gray upper parts. Oh, it's got sort of, you know, those legs are kind of pinkish. Is it something really interesting? Well, of course it might be, but the first thing is to work out what age this bird is. And it doesn't have any white spots on its wings, the wingtips. The bill is not really a color for an adult large gull. They're always yellowish bills of varying brightness. So it's clearly an immature bird. It's got very heavy streakings, and the tertials are kind of darkish. So it's not an adult bird. So that's the first clue to say, well, I probably can't rely on leg color that's there on adult birds. And so you work back from that and say, well, okay, this is going to be a lesser blackback gull. This also structurally looks fine for lesser blackback gull, quite long-winged. In contrast, this one doesn't, just to highlight the fact that they don't all look that really small-bodied, long-winged. They're not all like that. There is, you know, they're like people. Gulls vary the same way people do. So then back to the great blackback gull, I discovered to my surprise, I didn't actually have available or with me, or I could find a picture of an adult great blackback gull other than the one flying around that I showed you. There are a few on the quiz photos later on as well. But this is a bird probably in the third year, and this upper part color will be a bit darker, but obviously it's all going to be very smooth. You know, when it's an older immature, it's got some brown on it, and it's starting to get white tips. The great black gull, beg your pardon, never has very much head streaking in winter. The adults will have a little bit, you know, very faint, and the immatures tend not to either. So it's also very white-headed. But regardless of age, this bill is a real key feature. It's a very powerful bill, very large, heavy bill. You know, they predate other birds quite often. People are always horrified to hear that they eat puffins. I'm afraid they do. They can get their hands on, and they've got the equipment to do it. If you look at it, compare it to the ring-bill gull there, the bill there, This is a herring gull, pale gray upper parts and the yellow bill with a red spot. It's much heavier and it's got that big head. It's a really big, bulky bird. The largest herring gulls can be about the same size as the smallest great black-backed gulls. And when these birds are younger, they also have this very white head, white body, and contrasting upper parts to them. So unlike the herring gull, which is kind of brownish underneath and with brown head and quite uniform brown when it flies, this is both in first and second year plumage, very white head, white underparts. The head is never very strongly streaked apart from when we first see these birds when they're very young. The upper parts are very strongly marked, really boldly barred on the wings, boldly marked on the upper parts. Lots of white above the tail, even more so than the lesser black-backed gull. And of course, just very large lumbering birds. So that kind of, the sort of thing that people always get stuck on with gulls is those younger ones. So just bear that in mind. The ones which are overall brown herring gulls. The next most common one in most places will be the great black-backed gull, which is much whiter on the head and underparts and very boldly marked above. Then there's the lesser black-backed gull, which unless you're going to where they're particularly common, you only see in very small numbers, 2s and 3s out of several hundred for the most part. And they're somewhere in between the herring gull and the great black-backed gull. Just one more comparison of these two darker back gulls, and you can just see the difference in both the upper part color and the structure. This bird, the lesser black-backed gull, does look short-winged here, but it's still growing its primaries actually at this point. They're not all there. And this photograph, I think, is from December. And this is a young, maybe third, fourth year great black-backed gull. So looking super different. And we have a herring gull in the foreground, these gulls are all at the same angle. So you can see the type of contrast in the upper parts there. Just before we finish this, if you look at enough gulls, you start to see birds here that don't quite look right for any species. And, the really interesting birds here, potentially the ones that are midway in color, upper parts color between the herring gull and the lesser black-backed gull. And because that could be, a really interesting bird vagrant from Asia or Europe, or a California gull. Unfortunately for me, the only times I've ever found gulls that look like that, they've all turned out to be hybrids between lesser black-backed gulls and herring gulls, which is what we think this one is, this one here. These are two herring gulls. And this one is a bit darker. It's at the same angle as this one, and it wasn't very sunny anyway. You can see it here when it's flying around. It kind of looks a bit like a lesser black-backed gull, but much paler. So that's the most likely one. And be on the lookout for those. I think they're more common. Well, actually, it's not just me thinking it. You can see the data. They're more common than they used to be. The first time I found one about 15 years ago or more, I was really pretty excited about it. Now, if I look at a big enough group of gulls, I'm, 500 or so, I think I've got a pretty good chance of finding a hybrid, lesser black-backed herring gull. Of course, we know the situation in the West when, half the gulls in a flock you look at are hybrids of, glaucous winged and Western, or glaucous winged and herring, or something else. So, okay. So, and just before one last thing, I was going on about the confusing immature birds. So here's all three of the brownish looking birds in there as immatures. So we have on the left here a great black-backed gull. We have on the right here some herring gulls, and we have in the middle a lesser black-backed gull. You can see the typical difference in sizes. So this is easily the biggest. This is the smallest and looks long-winged. And this is the most pale and contrasting looking bird. The herring gulls are really quite smooth brown here, not very strongly marked, brown underparts. And then a lesser black-backed gull is in the middle. It's pale, but with much heavier streaking than the great black-backed gull. And it has that area I'm circling now, which is the dark shading around the eye, which it often has. And lesser black-backed gulls and great black-backed gulls in the first year often have really black bills, really solid black. Herring gull usually gets varying amounts of pale on the bill, as you can see here. Sometimes it's more strongly defined than others. Okay, so Neville, I don't know whether any questions came in on the chat, since I can't see it, I'm happy to pause for questions about that, but also very happy to move on to probably a more delightful group of gulls, the smaller hooded gulls. But
yeah, no questions as yet. So I think
okay,
let's continue.
I'll continue.
Yeah.
So we're going to cover 5 gulls here: laughing gull, Franklin's gull, Bonaparte's gull, black-headed gull, and little gull. Franklin's gull is probably the outlier in terms of frequency of occurrence in Maryland. I mean, it's probably annual, but not very, usually not very gettable, quote unquote. Whereas black-headed gull and little gull, which are, they're great birds to see, usually when one turns up, it hangs around. And quite often in the Baltimore area, both of those have hung around. Little gull in particular seems to be something that turns up in specific areas. They turn up in Montgomery County at Violet's Lock area. They turn up at Back River. They turn up at particular spots along the Susquehanna. And they don't seem to turn up much anyplace else. I did see they had one on the Pelagic this weekend, which really surprised me. So, those two often need a bit of work to find. Franklin's gull, unfortunately, I think is much less frequent than it was. I stand to be corrected on that, but I think it was more common 30 years ago or so. So let's look at these, and let's start with the laughing gull, which is on the point of really coming back into Maryland. They kind of are, it's almost like these birds have a calendar. They're pretty much here right up until the end of December. And then right in early January, they just seem to go, including from Ocean City. I mean, sometimes we have 1 or 2 hanging around, but they're there until the last couple of weeks of December, and then they just decide to go. And though they don't look like this when they come back, for much of the year, they have upper part colors a bit paler than the lesser blackback gull. They have the head with a bit of shading on it. I wouldn't call it streaking. And of course, it's a bold hood in summer. That's what we'll be seeing soon. When the young birds start first appearing, they're very nice looking. They've got this even color on the back of the head and the neck and breast, and this kind of scalloped look here with fairly plain feathers with pale fringes. And like, all these birds of this age, they don't have any markings on the wings. They're just dark. They've got a dark tail. Sorry, let's skip back to that very quickly. And as they get a bit older, what they can do, or what they will do, is they will lose some of this and they will grow some gray feathers. So, by the time we're into September, October, when you look at flocks of laughing gulls, again, it's a 3-year gull, but the second and third years don't look terribly different because the laughing gull doesn't have a lot of white spots on the wing. And the young birds at that point will have brown wings. Mostly, they may actually be getting some gray in it, but then this sort of gray upper parts, which are the same color as the adults. So anyway, they'll be turning up pretty soon if they haven't done so already. Probably a couple of weeks, a bit too early for them right now. So coming back soon. And Franklin's gull is a really similar looking bird and can cause a lot of difficulty. This is a bird I actually saw in Virginia at a landfall. I think it was in October. And the lower photo shows the Franklin's gull here with the laughing gull here. Upper part colors are pretty much exactly the same. There's quite a difference in what they call structure and size. So the Franklin's gull, if you look at the bill here, it's a much finer bill, a smaller bill than the laughing gull. And you can see that when you compare these two. The Franklin's gull also has more white on the wings. This is not a full adult bird, but if we were to turn up in spring as an adult, they have that full black head with really bold white crescents around the eyes, much bolder than the similar birds. And they have a lot of white in the wings, so much so that when you're flying, you just sort of see black markings on the wing, and that's all. So that's kind of what we're faced with here. They have been pretty infrequent in recent years. There was an influx of them a few years ago with a particular weather pattern that pushed a load of them across, but they're mid-continent birds. And of course, you can see them if you go to, Texas in the spring, they're moving through in big numbers. Then they go and breed on the prairies, and then they move back through, some straggle. Interestingly enough, they make it to the District of Columbia fairly regularly in the big laughing gull flocks. But they're kind of hard to catch up with. They don't usually stick around. There wasn't one that stuck around in Kent County, I believe, a few years ago now, but they're not easy to get actually in Maryland. And they typically, you know, they might go to a landfall, but they'd be kind of hard to pick out in winter sorry, not in winter, in late fall. And they move out of the US pretty much entirely in winter and go and winter off the Pacific coast, the coastline, Chile, Peru, that area. It's my understanding.
Clive, is there a distinction between male and female? That's a question.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So for most gulls, it's really just the size that's the difference. Male gulls are larger than female gulls. And sometimes that's apparent. If you see them as a pair, you often see that. Most times you're just making assumptions that the largest birds in the flock are males and the smallest ones are females. So gulls, it's really an individual variation when they're immatures and to some extent as adults, and age-related variation that you're dealing with. Here's a Franklin's gull in the in full breeding plumage. Absolutely gorgeous gulls. Lots of white on the wings. This would be mostly solid dark with smaller spots for a laughing gull. And this has got really bold white crescents. My recollection is it's been some time since there was spring laughing gull, Franklin's gulls. Some of them turned up in DC about 15 years ago when the golf course used to get flooded, but I don't know when, you know, the last time we've had them in Maryland is. We are mostly fall birds, immature birds, adults in winter plumage, unfortunately. But if you go to Texas in the spring, you'll see them, and they're, you know, they're really, really nice birds to see. Okay, so another bird that's starting to come back is the Bonaparte's gull. They stage in pretty big numbers on the rivers, and I'm starting to move through right now. It's what they call a 2-year gull. So it's basically just has a first-year plumage, which we tend to see. You know, they've mostly molted out of the juvenile plumage. They have this fairly pale gray upper parts. It's a young bird. It's got these dark bars and markings on the wings, got this dark trailing edge. When they're adults, they lose all of that. They're very clean looking birds. This white leading edge, you can see at a long distance, often, you know, if it's bright, just kind of flashing away. Regardless of the age, there's one key difference, well, two key differences really, from black-headed gull, which we'll turn to next, that you can see in both of these birds, the really white underwing there. There's just a strip of black. There's a tiny little bit of black on the leading edge there. That's what that's known as. Same for the young bird. Even though the upper wing looks a bit different, the underwing is this very pale area that I'm circling here with the black strip. And that's common throughout the age of these birds. And they're also smaller than the black-headed gull, which we're looking at next. So I've just jumped here. So here's an adult, but this also applies when they're young birds. They have this very dark area on the middle primaries. The outer primaries are white, but a very dark area here. Otherwise, they don't look too different to if they were sitting there, apart from the leg and bill color. Bonaparte's gulls have a fairly similar color pattern. You know, they're pale gray, got dark tertials, and they show a dark bar there. Black-headed gulls have a noticeably reddish or orangish bill with a well-defined black tip and orangish legs. So, you know, as you see, I'm going to concretely jump back. The Bonaparte's gull has a very black bill and much paler legs. Watch out in summer when these birds start to come back. Black-headed gulls often have their hood earlier than Bonaparte's gulls. And it's a dark brown, and the Bonaparte's gulls is really a very very blackish gray, a colder color. But the exact tone can be hard to judge. And in spring, two things happen. The Bonaparte's gulls get brighter legs, and the black-headed gulls get darker bills. So the adults can really have sort of blackish red bills as black-headed gulls. So it's not quite so easy. They're quite a bit different in size, though. I mean, black-headed gulls are about the same size as laughing gulls in terms of body. Their wings aren't as long, but they're about the same size. So then let's move to the smallest gull. We covered earlier the largest gull in the world, which is the great black gull. So the little gull is the smallest, and there's usually one kicking around Baltimore. There's often gettable on the Susquehanna, and they're tiny birds. So here's a picture of there's a little gull in the middle. These are Bonaparte's gulls alongside it, which are distinctly larger. It's not, it's not always easy to pick them out of a flock based upon size, but just to emphasize that, they're as small as a tern in terms of the body is, one of the medium-sized terns. And they look even smaller because their tails are shorter. So very small birds, they do a lot of, like the Bonapartes, do a lot of surface dipping. The adults, which we see a lot, my feeling we don't actually see many little gulls that aren't adults. I don't know why that is. But when you see them flying, and here's the underside, and here's the upper side, you have this really real strong contrast as a bird flaps its wings. You can keep on seeing this sort of charcoal gray underside, which is outlined in white, and then very pale on the upper parts, no black markings at all. And when we see them, they often don't have a dark head. They've just got this skull cap with a dark spot. That's really typical. When they're resting, it's just kind of whitish. You can see in this bird at rest, it's got a white area at the end of the bird and then a dark area. That dark area you're seeing is the underside of the wing on its right-hand side. So you're just seeing this basically that I'm outlining here. They're usually pretty much always with flocks of Bonaparte's gulls. When they're flying around, size per se won't, help you to pick them out all that well. But look for the pattern. They don't have that white leading edge that the Bonaparte's gulls do. It's a solid gray as adults, and they have this very dark underwing. And since these birds are usually flying around, that's helpful. It's harder to pick them out like this bird is when they're at rest. It's much harder, actually. Minor point is they're slightly paler gray. You can see that here, but that's also not a lot of use. So those are the smaller gulls. They're an awful lot of fun after slogging through large immature gulls. Delightful little things. Usually Bonaparte's gulls and little gulls, you're not really going to find them loafing around in a parking lot like you do with laughing gulls and ringbill gulls. So it's not a chance to study them that way. So now let's turn to the white-winged gulls. This is the thing that everybody wants to look for in winter when you've got a big flock of gulls. And there's been a few Iceland gulls knocking around in the area, including in Baltimore. I can't remember a glaucous gull this winter. And Iceland gulls, I would say about twice as common as glaucous gulls. And I kind of have a feeling that we're seeing less glaucous gulls than we used to, although maybe that's just me and it's just me not seeing them. But I just don't think we're seeing as many reports as we used to. This used to be one of the most complicated parts of the presentation to give, because I used to have to cover the difference between Iceland gull and Thayer's gull. That's much simpler now because they got lumped a couple of years ago. So you can still try to tell them apart, but they're not different species now. I don't know whether they'll unlump them ever. I kind of feel not actually, but who knows? Because that was always the biggest headache, frankly. And I hope that wasn't why they lumped them, that there were more legitimate reasons. So let's go through these gulls of the far north, starting with the glaucous gull. What we usually see are immature birds. A couple of things. These are really big birds. They're almost as big as great black gulls. And often when you see a glaucous gull in a flock, and there was a question earlier about the difference between male and female, if it's a male, it's going to be one of the biggest birds in the flock. It will be about as big as the great black gull. They're a bit different in shape. And one thing that's really noticeable about glaucous gulls is the bill. So the pattern of the bill is very consistent in the first year birds, pink base with a really well-defined black tip. That's extremely consistent. And these two are first year birds here. And the bill is not a really heavy hooked bill like the great black gull. It's almost completely parallel edges. So it's a fairly thick bill, but it doesn't have this big bulge in it halfway through at the gonus. And the other thing is that they're usually really pale. Often by the time we see them, they started to lose the brown markings they had. This bird, when you're flying, you can see it on the wings a bit, but the body's very pale. When they come back the next winter as second year birds, which I think this one probably is, I'm guessing it is, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it probably is just because it looks like it's getting some gray in here. It's still very pale. The bill is a lot like the first year, but with a bit of a pink tip. And as it gets older, it'll start to get pale gray. Adult glaucous gulls are very pale on the upper parts. Here's a couple of examples. Paler than a herring gull. If you had one in good light sitting next to a herring gull, you'd see that's actually a little bit paler. Pink legs. They don't usually have very much head streaking, a little bit around the neck, but usually very white, and white wings. So the young birds have white wings. It's just shit back here. There's no dark markings here where I'm circling on the primaries. Ditto here on the wings here. So unfortunately, we don't really see very often adult glaucous gulls. I've seen them maybe twice in this area in winter in 20 years. So when we see them, they're usually the first year gulls. That's actually also true of Iceland gulls, which we're now looking at. And we're looking at the two varieties of Iceland gulls. What we used to call Iceland and what we used to call Thayers on the right. And we usually see immature birds of these as well. Maybe the adults just don't come as far south, or the ones that are wandering are immature birds. As you can see, it's quite a and some of them have very white wings, like this bird. You can still see it's more contrastingly patterned than the glaucous gull we looked at. But very pale in flight. You know, if you're looking at a flock of birds and they all go up and one of these is in it, you know, you should see that pretty quickly. This is a Thayer's gull from the west coast, and it looks a lot more like a herring gull. And actually on tone of upper parts, sometimes it's hard to tell them apart. But Iceland gulls are quite delicate looking birds typically. So when you look at these, we don't have them next to a herring gull, but they usually have smaller heads, smaller bills, finer bills. They're kind of a cuter looking bird. And the first year birds have got this, you know, very pale markings. Some are much paler than this. Some are quite dark. This isn't terribly different to the overall pattern for a herring gull, including when it's flying, although the outer one you can see is much paler. So it only has these sort of dark brown strips, which I'm outlining on the wing. But they're kind of fairly similar to herring gulls. We mostly get birds that are much more similar to this. You know, birds like this are much less frequent. Possibly also we don't notice them as easily. But usually if you go to a big enough landfill, there's an Iceland gull hanging around in a flock of 500 or so herring gulls and the commoner gulls, which you can't unfortunately say for glaucous gulls. They're not quite that frequent. As they get older, they start to pick up the gray. So this one, well, this is probably a second year bird. You know, you can see its pale brown wings and it's getting some gray. It still has the same fairly smallish bill. Here's two adults. This is a real, you know, more of a white-winged Iceland type. This is a Thayer's gull from British Columbia, Canada. Looks kind of a lot like a, in terms of upper part color, it's actually slightly darker than a herring gull. The wings look quite blackish. I think if you compared it to a herring gull, you'd see next to it, you wouldn't see they were quite that black. And the head pattern is a bit different, and the bill is much smaller. So the bill is usually a lot finer than the herring gulls. And it's important to be aware of variation on this as well. So here's an Iceland gull. This is a Thayer's. I actually took this in Japan, this photo. This is a herring gull. So, you know, herring, I was mentioning earlier variability, and some herring gulls can turn up and have very little dark in the wing. And you're more likely to see those here than an adult Iceland gull. And if you look at this bird, you can see quite a big head. If you think about what we've just been looking at, a big head and a heavier bill. But other than that, the wing pattern's not terribly different between these two birds. So that's a potential ID pitfall. And when you're scanning around looking for them, a lot of these birds, these herring gulls like this, won't show much white underneath. So if you're underneath the birds, you You might think, oh, there's a white-winged gull.
Clive, if there's a question here about the Iceland gull. Are the
Yes.
legs darker or pinker than a herring gull?
So I think if you're comparing birds in coming into breeding plumage, I would say typically Thayer's gull, definitely the Thayer's version of it, has a deeper sort of more purpley red than reddish pink than the herring gull on average. I don't think we'll see so much of that. If you had one turn up here in winter, I'm not entirely sure, how different the legs would be actually, because leg color varies a bit between the seasons. I would rely much more on the structure of the bird. How heavy is the head and the bill? What does it look like relative to the others? These birds will always be with herring gulls sitting around them. If it's the same shape, the bill's the same heaviness of a herring gull, you're looking at an unusual herring gull, or one that's a bit paler or whatever. If it's distinctly more petite, then you've probably got an Iceland gull. So that's the main thing I would use if you're comparing the darker Iceland gulls to the herring gulls. The other pitfall, which I don't have a picture of, and before I come onto this bird, is birds which have got plumage pigmentation issues, whether it's albinism or leucism, or there's other varieties of that, all of which different terms, but different causes, they often end up the bird looking all white. And you might think, well, hey, that could be a glaucous gull or an Iceland gull. And there's a couple of things to do. One is to check the bare parts. So if a gull's all white and it's got a yellow bill with a red spot, i.e. an adult bill, it's a bird with an odd plumage. It's not Iceland gulls and glaucous gulls don't look like that. The other thing to check is the structure of the bird. So sometimes great black back gulls will be all white. And the way to tell them apart from a glaucous gull is the bill shape. They have that heavy and very deeply curved bill at the gonus on a great black back gull, for example. And then finally, if it flies, even really washed out and pale, but if glaucous or Iceland gulls hang around till May or June, they're really bleached by then and they can look really white. But when they start flying around, if you look at the underwings, they've still got dark markings on them, which, haven't, because they've not been exposed to the sun, they won't be sticking out. So one final thing to be wary of is that we do very occasionally see hybrids of glaucous and herring gull here, so-called Nelson's gull, it's known as. And they look quite a little bit like a glaucous gull. They've got a pink bill with black very often. Sometimes the black bleeds back along the mandibles, and the wings aren't a pale mid-brown. So you can see one of these, think, hey, what do I have here? Is it a Thayer's gull or an Iceland gull? And they will be, a few things to note about these birds is they'll be quite large usually. They're, between a herring gull and a glaucous gull in size usually. So much bigger than an Iceland gull you'd expect to be, which is smaller than a herring gull on average. So that's one thing to look at. And then look at the bill and other things. We just don't get very many of these. So if you find a bird like that, it's great. It shouldn't be something that you should worry about. And these days people have got cameras, so just document it. Okay, so that's the white-winged gulls. So let's now move on to the rare gulls. And I'm going to start with the most recent rare gull you guys have, which was a challenge to catch up with. I was fortunate enough to be standing around outside the landfall when it turned up one time, but I know it really gave people a hard time and a good run around. California gull, common gull, black-legged kittiwake, which I must admit is, I'd like to say shouldn't be in the rare gull category. And if you go back 20 years or more, when people were doing pelagics in winter, you would expect to see them. And even when we did one about 7 or 8 years ago, we got decent numbers on it. I don't think either of the pelagics that went out of Ocean City this winter had black-legged kittiwake. And I know there's been a decline. Well, they're just not coming as far south in winter. So actually, it's got kind of rare, unfortunately. And Sabin's gull as well. So let's start with the slaty-backed gull, of which, there's that recent one, which obviously must have departed now. Gulls have started to wander off. And it was kind of a much anticipated bird. There was, we can get into this, but there was a well-documented bird that was back in the 90s at Conowingo, which is a possible slaty-backed gull. And Phil Davis, who's the secretary of the Records Committee, has put up a really excellent blog, which I think you can access off the MOS pages on the Records Committee, which has all the documentation and actually the opinions of experts they circulated to at the time. And it wasn't accepted, and I doubt it's going to be recirculated. And here, and these are pictures actually from Japan. These aren't pictures of the bird we've had recently in Maryland. As you can see, the upper part colors is pretty similar to the lesser black-backed gull. It averages a bit darker, and it often has this kind of almost a bluish tinge to it. I mean, not always, but sometimes it's really apparent. But there's a few things which are really distinctive. So the legs are varying shade of pink as adults, brightish pink. And the upper parts often have what they term either as this white skirt. When the wing is folded, it has a really broad white area here. And that was really noticeable on the bird in Baltimore. It was sitting there compared to great black-backed gulls, which don't really show that very much. And that shows up when it's flying around, this really broad white trailing edge. And they don't have a lot of black on the primaries. They have these white spots at the base of where the dark area is, the so-called string of pearls. And they often have this gingery streaking around the head. There's usually streaking. It's often concentrated around the neck and head. Birds are variable, though. This is a bird from February from Japan. It's just kind of lost its streaking. There's various other differences. The bill is a little bit of a different shape. And they're kind of, on average, they're short-legged, shortish-looking winged gulls. So the shape is a bit different. But you mainly notice that once you've zeroed in on it and said, okay, this really looks like a slaty-backed gull. There's been more and more of them further north. So kind of it wasn't a surprise when people finally found one here. In fact, if we could get into landfills the way we used to sort of 30 years ago, I'm sure this bird would have been found earlier, but some of the best landfills, it's really hard to see what's on them. Even the one that people were going to at quarantine, standing outside, it's just difficult unless you're right up in the middle of what's going on at the landfill. Maybe not so difficult to identify if we ever get an immature. So this is what's here on the lower right-hand panel, because they have the same upper part color. It's a lot like a lesser black-backed gull, but they're a real different shape. They're shorter winged, shorter legged. They've got a bit of a heavier bill. They're kind of quite distinctive. The wings are often very pale. It's almost like the white-winged dark-backed gull I always think of slaty-backed gull as. And in immature first-year plumage, this would be a real challenge to get one confirmed. But it's possible since people are identifying these on the West Coast. So just be on the lookout for a bird that looks a lot like a herring gull, but is paler. The wings look paler, is a bit of a different shape. And when it flies, you'll see some differences. It would need to be photographed. It's kind of beyond the scope of what we're covering today, but quite distinctive as an adult.
That bird looks more like a pigeon to me than a gull. Why was that?
Thanks for the question. I didn't get all of it. Could you repeat, please, or also maybe put it in the chat? Let me just move back the slide as well, right? So go ahead, Guy.
The bottom bird look more like a pigeon than a gull. When you look at the
Yeah, just put it in the chat.
When you look at coloration, the only way I could tell that it was a gull was by the feet.
Guy, my apologies. It's the audio for whatever reason is not coming through very clearly. I'm terribly sorry. I know I heard you referring to the birds at the bottom, but I couldn't hear any more specifics. I'm wondering whether you could type the question in the chat and we'll come, we can look at it. I couldn't hear all of what you were saying.
The question is divided
Okay, I'll text it into you.
That's much clearer, by the way. All of a sudden, you're very clear. But that's great.
Best to text right now.
Yeah, that's great, and we'll come back to that. So while we're just let's just look at California gull, which I'm pretty sure you've had in Baltimore, but really we don't see very much of, and I think that's partly not being able to go into landfills, so that's where they're going to be. Kind of similar to a herring gull. The upper parts are darker, but sometimes the contrast isn't super noticeable. It's not like you're looking at a lesser blackback gull compared to herring gulls. And with what I was saying about the angle, it looks a bit, sometimes it's not always so noticeable. It's a short-legged bird. You can see that here. The legs are yellowish, bright yellow in breeding plumage. The eye is dark. It typically looks a bit sort of short-legged and long-winged compared to the herring gull. And it's got a dark spot on the bill. And when they're young, as immature birds, which is say 2 or 3 years, they might be quite distinctive because they have a darker upper parts, which I'm outlining, darker than a herring gull. Again, beware of the light. And they have this very distinctive bluish legs. Now, it's not to say another bird couldn't get that unusually, but they have this bluish legs. Quite tough in the immature in the first year plumage. Basically, a lot like a herring gull in terms of smooth brown. There are some differences. They very quickly get a pink and black bill. There are other more subtle differences. Size and shape would be the key thing to go on. I just wanted to check whether we had guys questioning the chat. I don't know how to see the chat.
I don't see any yet.
Okay. Well, perhaps we can, we'll circle back to that. Let me move through common gull, which we need to be on the lookout for because it just seems we're getting more and more of these. So I'm just going to quickly look at something. Okay. So as many of you probably know, Mew gull was called. Mew gull was split last year by the AOU into what's now called the short-billed gull, which I have to say was a very unpopular name amongst most birders, and the common gull. So the common gull is the form that's found in Eurasia. And there are 3 types, of which 2, and they're kind of distinct. 2 are being found on the East Coast. The one that's from Siberia, the Kamchatka gull, like slatyback, seems to come over the top and wander down the East Coast. And the common gull, which must drift over from Northwest Europe, the Canis subspecies, and the short-billed gull. And I believe Maryland has or will have, as the records committee is just sorting this out, a confirmed record of common gull, but not of short-billed gull. So short-billed gull is the one when you go to California, you see that bird. In adult plumage, these 2 species, and somehow the slide on short-billed gull has disappeared actually as I'm looking at it, but we're looking at the common gull right now. But they're pretty similar in adult plumage, that they're slightly darker upper parts than the ring-billed gull. They're more petite birds. The bill is smaller. Obviously, the bird's called short-billed gull, one of them. So you can imagine it's got a small bill. There's a few other differences as well, but that would be the thing to key off on adult birds, the structure and the upper part color to some extent. When they're young birds, immature birds are a bit of a challenge. This is a young common gull. It looks a lot like a ring-billed gull, except the head is much more petite. I always think they look a bit like a plover, like a semi-palmated plover, that same bill shape, not really a gull bill. And the wing is much darker and browner. You can see that here. It doesn't have that contrasting look that the ring-billed gull has. But you'd really need to document an immature bird. Well, you need to document an adult as well, but you need to sort of good photos. There's differences between the short-billed gull and the common gull. I would say for an adult, you're probably going to have to see the bird flying around to tell the difference, because there's fairly complicated ways of working out based upon the pattern of these feathers here, the primary feathers, to tell the difference between short-billed and common as adults. The short-billed gull is much more evenly brown here. as a young bird. And then we have the black-legged kittiwake here, which used to be pretty frequent on pelagics. Isn't as rare as the birds I've just been talking about, but unfortunately is much less common. It's kind of a specialist. Very occasionally they'll turn up somewhere where they shouldn't be. You know, a first-year bird like this nearly always, which has got this very striking pattern on the upper wings. We call it an M because, you know, if you start from here, it looks like an M. Or a young bird, or an adult bird, which has got these solid black wingtips and a yellow bill. You know, you just don't see them from shore usually. Maybe if we had a bad winter storm, you might. But you've generally got to go on a pelagic or, and then Sabin's gull, unfortunately super rare here. Occasionally turn up inland. A couple of years ago, several turn up on the Potomac at different spots. They have this at all plumages. They have this very striking wing pattern of gray, white, and black. The adults have a black hood. We pretty much never see that. We don't really see them from pelagics either. Anywhere on the East Coast, they pretty much, I think, when they breed in Arctic Canada, the ones that go winter in the Southern Hemisphere head east and then south, because you see them much more in Western Europe. And like this bird, they often end up off the coast of South Africa, which is where this bird was photographed. So that's where they are. So that's the end of the presentation. I've got time for quizzes, but let's try to maybe catch up on the questions. I don't know whether, Guy, you've had a chance to type that in or want to have another go, or other questions. Back to you, Neville, and then I can take us through the quiz as well if you like. So
yeah, I don't see anything in the chat yet, but Guy, if you want to try and ask your question again, let's see if the audio is good.
I can't hear the audio. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. Sorry, Guy.
it's not
Yeah,
coming
just
through.
go to
send
the
it-
quizzes. Yeah.
You can always send it in to me as well. Send it by email. I think happy to give my email contacts out, and Neville and Joe have it.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll
so-
send that to Guy. I'll send
Yeah.
that to Guy. I'll get his email to him.
There
Great,
is-
thanks.
Yeah, there is another question from Kim. Can you recommend a gull ID book?
Yeah, okay. Actually, 2 are about to come out. 3 are about to come out.
Are you writing them?
So I haven't seen any of them yet, and you know, I've already got about 4 or 5 Gull ID books, and you know, I'm not sure I have room. I don't know how much more room on my bookshelf there is. So, of the ones you can get right now, I think the ones I'm aware, so I haven't read all of them either. So Kevin Carlson and Pete, what's the guy's name from Cape May? They have a book about simplifying gulls. I'm afraid I haven't read that. So I don't know what that's like. The book that Dunn and Hal did back in 2004 is good. It's heavy going. Frankly, it's pretty tough, even if you really like gulls going through it. It's instructive, but and then there's been a couple of books by Klaus Manning Olsen. But there are 3 books will come out quite soon. Fred Schaffer's doing a book on gulls, and I'm afraid I've not seen that, but I think that probably will be one that, you know, won't really, you know, the other 2 ones I'm about to talk about will probably devote a lot of time to, you know, subspecies of common gull, because they're really for the gull aficionado. And from what I've seen of Fred's book, it doesn't try to go into that level of detail. So it's probably going to be one that you can absorb stuff from more, but I haven't read it. So there's 2 that are about to come out. One, if anyone is on the Gulls of North America Facebook page, Amar Ayash, who moderates that, is coming out with a book on North American gulls. And I know he's been around, he's been posting them on that Facebook site. He's been around Europe photographing gulls to go into that. So I expect that to be a very good book. But, you know, we'll have a lot of stuff in there that you won't normally see. So I guess I should have started by saying, if your objective is to learn the basics of gulls, the more, you know, the real specialist gull book may just have too much information. If you like gulls and have been looking at them and want to take it to the next level, they'll be good. And then there's another one that is just about to come out on European gulls, which will definitely treat North American gulls, as will Amar's book will treat European gulls, which is by Peter Adrians and some other authors. He's a Belgian birder who's very good on gulls. So I don't know when Amar Ayesh's book is coming out, I'm afraid. But one thing to say is that, a great approach to learning the gulls is, even the Sibley Guide has got a reasonable treatment of the typical plumages. So if you go out and start looking at flocks of gulls wherever you can, you go to Ocean City, there's usually a few, and just start to assume that, well, these are all going to be, start to work out why aren't they the commonest gulls, like herring gull, great black-backed gull, even if you're seeing stuff that doesn't make sense. Then you start to unpack them and to sort of learn that here's some of the things to really look at. That's the smooth brown underparts on a herring gull, the structure and heavy bill of a great black-backed gull, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a really long answer, but there's a whole bunch of choices, and it probably depends on what how much you want to know about gulls, because you can get an awful lot of information on them if you want too much, one might say. Okay, so why don't I'm going to go through the quiz, and what I'm going to ask is people to pop answers in the chat, and I'll just give it a few seconds, and then I'll just say what I think the answer is. Since I photographed them, I'm pretty confident of the ID of all of the birds, actually. Okay, so actually, this is a question about what species of gulls we have here. So I'll give people a few seconds to answer, and then I'll have a go. How would I see the? I don't want to look for the chat actually, Neville, because I'm worried that will take the presentation off my screen. So
that's fine. I can relay what answers are coming up in the chat.
Great. All right. What have we got so far?
None.
None. Oh, okay. All right. Fair enough. Okay. So, well, this isn't a trick. There is one trick bird in here, but so let's go back to some basics. So what we see here is three very brownish looking birds. They've got really smooth brown underparts, kind of messy looking. They're the first year herring gulls. These birds here with grayish upper parts and that little half hood, they're laughing gulls. And I actually sneaked a Franklin's gull in here, but you'd have to look pretty hard, and it did take me some finding to get it. It looks very similar to a laughing gull, same upper part color. The head looks a bit darker, but when they're turning the heads, it's kind of hard to see. But this is the thing to key off. If you look at any flock of gulls in winter through to early spring, a flock of large gulls, you see a bunch of them that are brown. Those are immature herring gulls, mostly first year herring gulls. They're that consistent brown color. Okay, here's another one. So this is a bird with palish gray upper parts, and it's got a dark eye. And anyone want to have a go at this one?
Everybody's got 10 seconds.
I should have brought prizes. We might have got answers.
By the way, I think Joe answered the previous slide as herring and laughing gull.
Yeah,
so maybe he did win.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if he's the only contestant. So this is actually, if you remember the herring gull pictures I was showing earlier, they have pale eyes. This bird has a dark eye. But actually, it's not, so you might think, oh, it's got a dark eye. Is it a California gull? But actually,
there is an answer.
Oh, there is.
Well, so the Ray's answer is immature lesser black-backed gull. And
okay.
I see an answer from Joe. Oh, wait, did he change an answer? Lesser black-back.
Okay. So let's try to break this down and first of all, try to age the bird. So it's got this consistent color on the upper parts, which is a grayish color, and it's got black wingtips with quite large white spots. And it's mostly white on the underside. So that's going to make it an adult or a near adult bird. Those are, what you get with regard. You could swap that color in for dark gray or black, but those wingtips and a consistent color on the upper parts make it an adult. Now, if it was lesser black-backed gull, well, we can't compare it to other gulls, but would have to be something kind of odd about the exposure to make it look this pale. And they would normally look quite a bit darker than that. Leg color isn't quite right, but everything. So go to other gulls. Let's assume the tone of the photo isn't too accurate to real life. So it's about the right mantle color for a herring gull, which is actually what it is. It's just an odd one with an eye and a very head streaking. Variability. So we don't have this variability with male, female, and gulls. We do have variability, just individual variability, as well as age related. I mean, it could be that this bird it's in its 4th year, it's only just become an adult. It could just be it has a lot of head streaking. Some of them will have very little head streaking. Herring gulls average quite a lot, but it's variable. So the default is for gulls is always, okay, this looks a bit odd. It looks slightly different to one of the gulls I'm expected to see here. But the burden of proof is always, why isn't it that? So let's have a quick run through on some of these. Maybe a quick 10 seconds, and then we'll go to the answer for these gulls. We've got a bunch of gulls here. So just any ones you see, don't try and answer all of them. Just anything, start banging down whatever you see in there that you think you can name. What are we seeing, Neville?
None, but I want at least 5 answers. So come on, people.
So we've got very brownish looking birds. That's going to be young herring gull.
All right, the answers are streaming in. So
Okay.
Ray and Rahul and Robin are picking out herring gulls. Nancy's picking out great black back. Joe is picking up a glaucous gull. Any more?
Okay, so let's run through all of that. So plenty of herring gulls here, these young ones and the ones with pale gray. So this bird does look dark, doesn't it? And I was mentioning earlier about be careful about mantle shades because of the angle of the bird and everything. This is actually a lesser black back gull. It's probably not quite adult. One of the things you can see is you can compare it to this bird. So here's a herring gull, and this looks definitely smaller. It's kind of a petite bird. It doesn't have that heavy bill. But I must admit, you could, that mantle shade isn't terribly different to what you might see on some great black back gulls. This guy is a presumed hybrid between those two species. Just an odd looking bird. So, again, be wary of mantle colors helpful, but be wary of variation, be wary of the angle of the bird. This is probably a reasonable amount of sun. And also look at size and shape. That's also super important.
It looks like I missed Joe's lesser black back answer.
Oh yeah, so that's
Joe,
it.
you
That's
win.
what that one is.
You win an award again.
Lesser black back gull. This actually I devoted a whole slide to this particular bird. So let's give this one a few. There's only one bird, maybe definitely max of 10 seconds.
So I have Guy listing a ring bill, and Rahul has called this in Iceland. Kim is referring to this as a Thayers. Joe thinks it's in Iceland. Any more?
Okay, some good guesses there. So I can see where the ringbill gull guess was coming from because it has that pink and black, and it's kind of a palish looking gull. But so, the bill fits a first year ringbill gull, but the rest of the bird doesn't really, because, it doesn't have any gray here. And this is sort of finely patterned here. And this is kind of pale brown. So, it's a white-winged gull of some sort. So, so could it be a Thayers type Iceland or Iceland, that variation of darker Iceland gull? Well, they certainly could look like this body here and the wings, that kind of coloration could certainly fit. What I think is the giveaway here is the head and bill. So it's got that glaucous type bill to it, pink with a really sharply defined black tip. You don't usually see that till these birds are a little bit older, but it's a potential pitfall. So this bird is a real challenge. If you just saw it by itself, I can see why you'd be saying, well, that could well be in Iceland. I happened to see this bird with other birds, and it was a big bird. It's actually a glaucous herring hybrid, and it kind of has that big head and the kind of a bulky look to it. But it's just to show that these birds can be difficult if you see them by themselves, or if you're just considering it by yourself. So when you see an unusual gull in a flock, make sure you're comparing it to the other ones in terms of size and shape and everything, rather than just looking at the bird itself, because a lot about that bird does say Iceland gull. So I can understand where those answers came from. Okay, so let's stay with the white-winged gull theme. Are these the same species or a different species? And what do we have?
All right.
And look at everything in the photos as well. That's one counsel I'm giving you guys. Look at everything. By the way, Neville, I should ask, does this Zoom end at a particular time, the meeting?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
Well, we don't worry. I didn't ask that, so we
Okay.
could go on forever. I've only got 4 more quizzes,
Gotcha.
but just in case it shut it off at 8:30. So what do we, any guesses coming in on these birds? They're both.
Yeah,
not-
so I think Guy thinks they're the same species. Rahul thinks the ring-billed is the lower right. Peter is asking if the legs are a different color. It appears so, but are they really different? Kim thinks the top is a glaucous with the bottom being in Iceland.
Okay.
Any more answers? We're going to give it, let's give it another 5 seconds. Any more? Are these the same bird or are they different? And if different, do you want to state which ones they are?
Okay, well, congrats to Kim for getting that right. Kim, I don't know whether you can unmute and explain, your answer. Can she? I don't know whether people can unmute.
The bird on the top just looks big compared to the ring-billed gull in the background. And then the bird down below, the head just looks smaller and more dainty. And then again, compared to the ring-billed gull, it's not that much. It's about the same size, just a little bigger.
Yeah, that's very good use of the information that's in the photographs. They look superficially really similar. This Iceland gulls don't normally have a bill that has quite that much pink, and it looks a lot like a glaucous gull. The legs, I can't tell what's going on here. Bear in mind that this was a bird on a landfall, so who knows what it was been wading in. Sometimes you get that for birds that have been at or on a landfill recently. The legs or even bill can look, can have stuff on it. But they're both really pale. This is very faded, so is this one. So we're really just going on size and shape. And as Kim was saying, this looks bulky. It's got that big blocky head. We can compare this one to a ring-bill gull, not terribly different. Here's the adult ring-bill, same sort of shape. So, just shows that birds are easy to identify quite often when they're with other birds. And gulls are often in a flock. That's one convenient thing about them. But a real potential pitfall there, and not necessarily easy to distinguish between these. If you saw them next to each other, you'd have no trouble, because the glaucous gull would be a lot bigger than the Iceland gull. But their birds aren't always that helpful, so we can't rely on them to do that type of thing.
Clive, what's the black spot at the base of that bird on the lower?
Oh yeah,
right?
that was something that was. This is an old photo. It was when I was digi-scoping through my, and I think that was some spot that had gone on my scope.
Gotcha. It's not on the bird. It's just.
Yeah.
in the
So
photograph.
I have literally thousands of pictures of gulls with a black spot on them, like that. Slightly out of focus, fuzzy black spot. Okay. Here's the next gull. And look at everything on this bird. Look at the, we can compare it to a few others in the foreground. Look at not just the color, but the shape of everything on it. Let's give it a few seconds. And
Yeah, I think this one's going to be easy. I think a lot of people are going to get this.
Oh, great.
So I've only got 3 answers. Any more? I've got 4. Ooh, Kim,
Are they
you're
all the
being
same?
brave. All right, so I have Rahul, Ray, Joe, and myself saying that this is a great black-backed gull. but Kim is gonna go with lesser black-back gull. And Peter says is a distinctive bill. I think that's a clue for everybody. Any more answers? All right, no more. Clive, who's right?
Okay, so the majority have it in this case. This is a great black-back gull. Would anyone like to, Neville, since you got the floor, what led you to think this was a great black-back?
Well, the funny thing is, I just took a photograph of an immature great black-back gull like 2 days ago, and it was because it's so distinctive. It's very white on the head and white on the underside, and it's got this really pretty patterning on the outside, and it's a big, big, big bird. So, and of course the bill shape. Look at that bill shape. So it's gotta be great black-back.
Yeah, and I'm going to guess that we already had this discussion about male and female. I suspect this is a female great black-back because, yes, it does have a big bill and it does look kind of bulky, but not as bulky as they can be. You know, some of the other photos I showed of great black-back gulls, you know, bigger heads, even heavier bills. And so I can understand a little bit the lesser black-back answer, particularly because this one just has to happen to have a bit of streaking behind the eye. The bill is a bit of an odd pigmentation, so it's maybe disguising the size, but it's kind of quite a heavy bill, quite a bulky looking bird. So just showing the variation you can get in these birds, but great job, everybody. Oh, I didn't, okay. This is a slight trick question, but I hope I'm not giving it away by if I say some people might have seen this bird. So let's give it a few seconds and see what we, and by this bird, I don't mean this species, I mean this bird.
I only have one answer till now. Let's wait for a few more seconds.
I know this bird, but I can't think of the name.
It did have a name. Yeah, it had. This bird had a name.
I know I've seen it before, but I can't think of the name.
Yep. What have we got, Neville?
All right, so we have Rahul, Shireen, and Ray saying this is a slaty back, I forget it. It's a slaty something. And Jean says it's a kelp gull. I don't think I've ever seen a kelp gull. Kim is indicating that this is a wrong leg color for slaty. Oh yeah, that's a good one. That's right.
That is a very good point, Kim. It is most definitely the wrong leg color for a slaty back gull. And actually, it's
there's another answer from Marcia, a shrimpy. I don't know what a shrimpy is.
Yeah, it is. So I'm pretty sure Marcia and Jean saw this bird. It hasn't been around for a long time. So I don't know, well, maybe 2003 was the last time it was here. This is a kelp gull. It's the only kelp gull that was in Maryland, and it was around for about 4 years, if my memory serves me correctly. I saw it twice, and it hung around by a lot of the time quite close to a restaurant down in St. Mary's County. I don't know whether it liked shrimp, and that's why it got called Shrimpy. Or I don't know where it got its name from. I think there's still a picture of it. If you go to that restaurant, I'm pretty sure there's a picture of it up there. So just in case this ever comes back again, this species, this leg color, this sort of, you know, it's almost pea green soup, a bit yellower, but leg color. So it's not yellow like a lesser black-back gull, and very dark upper parts. Is super distinctive. You know, it's nothing else that will look like that. There's a few other things, very black upper parts, very white head, but this leg color is really unusual and large gulls we get. Quite how it made it up here, who knows? Could have been a hurricane, I guess. But well done to Jean and Marcia for recognizing an old friend. Okay, so we have a bunch of gulls here. So have at it, everyone. What can you see in there? Just anything. You don't have to answer all of them. Just whatever you're picking up on.
I've got only one answer. Well, I see two answers now. We got 4 answers. 5,
Mhm.
6, 7. All right, let's see if I can get
Okay,
all
let's see
this.
what people are spotting in there.
All right, so Kim is picking out a glaucus as well as a great black-backed gull. Guy sees a great black-backed gull. Ray sees a great black-backed gull and a herring. Shireen sees a herring and a great black-backed gull. Rahul sees a herring, a glaucus, and a great black-backed gull. And lastly, Joe sees a great black-backed gull.
Great. Okay, so we got one great black gull there. So great job, everyone.
Yep,
And
right there.
yeah, and most of these are herring gulls. The brown ones are young birds, then there's the older ones. And then this bird, I kind of included it because when I took this picture, I was like, oh, great, there's a glaucus gull. So I took the picture. And it is mostly glaucus, but look at these wings. The wings are this, I think there's partly a high, it's maybe what they might call a second generation hybrid with herring, because the wings are pale brown. I didn't notice that till I got back home. It was a long time ago, and I was looking at the pictures, because otherwise it looks exactly like a glaucus gull. It's got a big head, that pink bill with a black tip, etc. So kind of close to that. So this is another multi-gull question, and I'm just going to give you one hint here. There are 5 species of gull here. So let's see who can get all 5. We'll give it let me know when you're ready to read answers out, Neville.
Yep.
And some are more obvious than others. Anything, answers coming in, Neville? For
There's
any
a
of them?
couple of them coming in.
Great.
So I'm just going to call out the species that have been identified. So greater black-backed gull. Yeah, there's also lesser black-backed gull.
Yep, there is, although
Okay.
I'd like to know which one people think it is.
All right, Joe was, I
There
think,
is one.
the only one to point out a lesser black-backed gull. Joe, which one are you pointing at? Joe, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I was muted. I thought it was the one on the lower right, but I'm not so sure now.
Which one on the lower right?
The immature or the
There's
mature?
yeah, that's one right
This-
there. There, yeah, that's it. Sure.
Yeah, boy, they're good. Very well done. That is
They're
a
very
lesser
lucky
black-backed gull.
because I thought it was the
Nice.
one above it, but until you hinted that it was the one below it, that's the
Oh,
one, I
okay.
guess, the one below it.
All right, there are some other answers. So herring gull, ring-billed, and Rahul and Kim have talked about an Iceland gull.
There's a thing up there.
Yeah.
I got
So
it.
we've got them all. Yeah. So most of these, there's a few great black-backed gulls, adults. These ones are really big ones with very dark back. A lot of herring gulls, mostly immatures, the smooth brown underparts like this one. The lesser black-backed gull, it's not the best image, but you can see if you've got a big enough screen that this has got streaking on a paler body, and it's got that paler head and a very black bill. So it's a first-year lesser black-backed gull. And yes, here's an Iceland. Always a delight to have that. Very pale Iceland. And it is a ring-bill gull. There's another, I think that's another ring-bill gull there. It's kind of small, but the others are mostly herring gulls. So that's a typical landfill group You know, lots of herring gulls, some great blackbacks. Ring-billed gulls often don't mix in big numbers with the big gulls. They often hang out together. And, you know, a white-winged gull and maybe one or two lesser blackback gulls. That's a kind of a representative sample of your typical landfill flock of gulls in our area in winter. Okay, last quiz and last photo. Yeah. So, what do we have here?
Can I call out the rock or the pigeon?
Yeah. And make sure you enter it as feral pigeon though, because eBird doesn't like it if you put it as a.
Good job, Neville.
Let me know when you're ready to read answers out, Level.
I've got only one till now. Anybody else? Ooh, that's a nice answer. Interesting. Okay, some more coming in. All right, so I have Ray picking out ring-billed gulls. Rahul is suspicious of a little gull in the center. Joe is also picking out a herring and a little gull. And Guy thinks they're all herring gulls.
Okay. Well, I mean, they are mostly herring gulls. Nearly all of them are. They're mostly adults and some first years. Again, the ones which are very brownish, first year herring gulls, maybe that's a second year one, but mostly brown. These adults have all got roughly the same, you know, palish gray upper parts, different amounts of head streaking. I think this was probably a February or March picture. So some of them, like this one, have got a white head. This has got a streaked head. It's just, you know, individual variation of where they are in the plumage cycle.
Well, nicely done, Guy.
So here's here are two ring-billed gulls here. And one that nobody mentioned is this bird here that I'm circling. You can't see a lot of it, apart from the fact it looks very white. And it's got a pink bill with a solid black tip. This is actually a glaucous gull. You can't see everything, and sometimes that's a view you have when you're looking at a flock of birds. You don't get to see all of what you want. And so sometimes you can't say, you know, I think if I saw that, I'd be pretty confident just looking at the shape of the head and the bill and what I can see of it as a glaucous gull, but you probably want to see all of it. Sometimes you don't get to see all of it before an eagle flashes them and they fly off. I know there are a couple of little gull ones. I think, I mean, little gull is just not something you would see at a landfill. You might see black-headed gull. You know, black-headed gulls do go to landfills. I have seen them there, but not that much. Laughing gulls do, Franklin's gulls, but Bonapartes and little gulls just don't do that. They don't really scavenge the same way. They tend to feed by dipping down to the water, a bit like a tern. They don't sort of hang around and fight for scraps. They don't turn up in McDonald's parking lots fighting for French fries and that type of thing. That's the domain of other less refined gulls.
What's this
Okay,
guy?
guys. Well, thanks for sticking with me for so long. Those of you who are still here.
What's the one in the center? The one in the center, the small one.
This one?
No, it's I'll mark
this
it up
one.
here. Yeah.
This one.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the aforementioned feral rock dove.
Oh, okay.
The white phase, the spotted white phase. Morph or whatever it is.
Oh my God, it looks like a small call.
Yeah, it does. I mean, that can be confusing, these birds, can't they? You know, if you have one that color turn up in a flock of gulls, first of all, you think, whoa.
Thought it was a trick question.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Let me see if I can do this. Great. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Clive. This was great. Appreciate your time and appreciate you putting together this presentation. This was really fun. I think we should do quizzes more often.
Yeah.
Just a little reminder for everybody that the next lecture is right now planned to be a hybrid session on April 5th. So it'll happen at the Sylvan Arboretum, but there'll also be a Zoom link. So if you're unable to attend in person, you can also attend via Zoom.